Okay, Hannah, is the live streaming working?
Yeah, that I can see.
You set to go?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm gonna admit this person, bring him in. Welcome everybody to today's presentation. This is part of the Holocaust Memorial Observances Week that we do every year. This is an annual event, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce Hannah Toffelmeyer, the Campus Activities Programming Board student lead on this program. These things are all possible because of Hannah, whom I just serve at the pleasure of the students. Just a couple little housekeeping tips here for y'all. You're welcome to turn your cameras on. You're welcome to turn your microphones on to ask questions. You're welcome to use the chat box. I want you all to know that this is being live streamed to the Ames Facebook page. So if you do not want your picture to be made public or your name public, then you'll want to change your name on your profile, on your Zoom profile here, and you'll want to ask your questions in the chat box. But otherwise, Dr. Booker invites exchange of ideas and conversation at the end of his presentation. So I leave it up to you. So I am going to turn this over to Hannah Toffelmeyer.
Cool. Thank you for the introduction, Janet. So today we have Dr. Michael Booker. He holds a PhD in modern European history with an emphasis on modern Britain and Ireland from the University of Tennessee. His doctoral dissertation, The Civil Religion of Loyalism in the Southwestern Lowlands of Scotland, 1688 to present, introduces the ideas that together the Loyalist institutions, including the Orange Order, Rangers Football Club, Loyalist street gangs, and paramilitary associations, protests, Loyalist flute bands, together constitute a civil religion based on the tenet of Protestant loyalism. Dr. Booker's areas of specialty include Protestant Northern Ireland, modern European history, modern British history, modern Irish history, modern world history, nationalism, civil religion, football, soccer, culture, and Colorado. Dr. Booker's book entitled Images of America Glendive, published Arcadia Publishing, is available in both digital and print format. And today he will be presenting a what's called a sacred nationalist civil religion, and it will be over kind of regarding the rise of the Nazi Empire. So this is going to be really interesting, and so I'll present to you all Dr. Michael Booker.
All right, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, today I'm going to be looking at this idea of Nazi civil religion, the idea that a civil religion, once cultivated over a period of time, can ultimately lead to episodes of violence and mass slaughter. So the rise of Nazism in general cannot be understood simply as a reaction to the socio-cultural and economic dislocations of interwar Germany. Nazism was a messianic civil religious movement which offered Germanic so-called Aryans the promise of a new life in a transfigured world that they would have complete ownership of. This presentation will demonstrate that Nazism was essentially a nationalist civil religion, and that the Hitlerian version of totalitarianism at its height undoubtedly possessed many of the functions of traditional supernatural religions. It'll also describe how messianic nationalism, like that of the Third Reich, can lead to episodes of violence, mass slaughter, and ultimately genocide. In his book, The Berlin Diary, by renowned historian William Schreier, he reflected on the Nuremberg rally of 1934 by saying, quote, borrowing a chapter from the Roman Church, he, Hitler, is restoring the pageantry and color and mysticism to the drab lives of 20th century Germans. Schreier stated, this morning's opening meeting in the Luitpold Hall on the outskirts of Nuremberg was more than a gorgeous show. It had something of a mysticism, a religious fervor of an Easter or a Christmas mass in a great Gothic cathedral. Schreier described how the packed hall was electrified when the band played the Badenweiler March, music only used for Hitler's entrances. As Hitler arrived, along with other leading Nazis, he was met by saluting followers. Krieg lamps, which are the little, lights that are used to light up the stage, were used to dazzle the stage where he sat, surrounded by 100 or so party officials, all bedecked in their uniforms, their Nazi uniforms, all Army and Navy officers alike. The music died down. Rudolf Hess read out the names of Nazi martyrs who had died fighting for the movement, while behind the assembled men, the ritually symbolic blood flag that had been paraded through the streets of Munich on the day of the failed beer hall putsch in Munich in 1923 was displayed. The blood flag was among the most sacred of all Nazi religious relics. For Nazis, it was a sacred symbol stained by the blood of the original martyrs to the cause. After Hitler took possession of the blood flag upon his release from Landsberg prison, he actually had it fitted with a ceremonial sleeve bearing the names of the 16 Nazi insurrectionists who died in the failed 1923 coup. 1926, at the Second Nazi Party Congress, Hitler ceremoniously bestowed the flag on Joseph Berchtold, the head of the SS. The flag was thereafter treated as a sacred object by the Nazi Party, carried by the SS at various Nazi Party functions. One of the most visible uses for the flag was when Hitler, at the party's annual Nuremberg rallies, touched other Nazi banners with the blood flag, thereby sanctifying them, I guess. This was done in a special civil religious ceremony called the flag consecration. When not in use, the blood flag was symbolically kept at the headquarters of the Nazi Party in Munich, the so-called Brown House, with SS guard of honor. William Schreier concluded that in such an atmosphere, it's no wonder then that every word dropped by Hitler seemed to be inspired by an inspired word from on high. Man's, or at least German's, critical faculty is swept away at such moments, and every lie pronounced is accepted as high truth itself, as Schreier says. This powerful scene from the early days in the Third Reich makes one consider how faith and politics are blurred by fascism into a civil religion. The creation of state-inspired symbols, rituals that evoke belief in some kind of higher cause are central to the concept of fascist civil religion. Really, no matter what form it takes. The concept of civil religion explains how fascism was more of a top-down form of domination, and it drew from the genuine belief that from wide sectors of society that lived under fascist regimes or were attracted to fascist movements. Nazi civil religion included a constellation of institutions, symbols, ideas, standards, practices that provided the Nazis with a sense of belonging, a sense of history, and I think most importantly, a sense of destiny. It was identified through Nazi civil religious community of believers, holidays, their folklore, their heroes, and most importantly, the observances of Nazi rituals. Roland Sherrill argues that civil religion is a form of devotion, outlook, and commitment that emotionally and physically binds members of an identity group together. Jean-Jacques Rousseau first coined the term civil religion in book 4 of his work, The Social Contract, in 1762. And from Rousseau's standpoint, civil religion was an inorganically created top-down phenomena that was an essential ingredient for the construction of a unified and stable nation. Rousseau reasoned that in a more secular post-Enlightenment world, the development of an agreed upon civil religion would define a common morality and help to maintain a sense of community, cohesiveness amongst members of a given society. He believed that it was important that the sovereign establish articles of a purely civic faith, not exactly as dogma of religion, but as sentiments of social commitment. The creation of civil religion would lead to the legitimization of the state as the primary object of devotion of a united citizenry. In the Rousseauian model, the civil religion of the state was artificial. It was imposed on society from above, and the individual was expected to identify, at least to a point, with the emblem of the state and all that it represented. Over 100 years after the publication of The Social Contract, Emil Durkheim revisited this idea of civil religion in his work, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. Durkheim believed civil religion was not made or manipulated by the sovereign, but spontaneously emerged from society itself. The organization of civil religion in Nazi Germany followed the Durkheimian model. It was a phenomenon that was reinforced and strengthened over time through an identity group's regular ritual observances of collective triumphs, and as with the blood flag, tragedies. These commemorations gave meaning and informed the overall value system of the identity group, further supporting the Durkheimian archetype. As Marcella Christie argues, civil religion is not something to be imposed on the individual. Rather, it's organic. It's a cultural force that ultimately acts on the individual. She agrees with Durkheim's idea that the state is too far removed from the people to act as the supreme moral agent in their individual lives. Solidarity with a civil religious group was dependent on the group's regularly gathering together, often in some kind of ritual celebration, to rekindle what Durkheim referred to as the collective effervescence of the past. The hallmarks of fascism is this hearkening back to some kind of romanticized vision of the past. Durkheim believed that gatherings like this, ritual gatherings, brought the imagined community together and allowed the individual the opportunity to renew and strengthen the bonds attaching themselves to their society. Thus, in Durkheim's view, civil religion was a byproduct of society itself. It was strengthened, it was preserved every time members of the imagined community gather together in ritual celebration. Loyalty and devotion to the civil religious group naturally diffused throughout the entire society, spontaneously diffused every time a group meets together to celebrate. As Marcella Christie observes, the resulting social or civil religious community is a natural phenomenon. Civil religious rituals like, say, torchlight parades or mass gatherings at Nazi rallies held in major German cities brought members of the civil religious community together under the same transcendent banner of Nazism. Sociologist Robert Bela argues that civil religion is embodied in a set of symbols, ideological beliefs, ritual practices, and organizational structures that sought transcendent meaning in the nation. Bela believes civil religion is embodied in a collection of beliefs, symbols, and rituals with respect to sacred things and institutionalized in the collectivity. He argues that civil religion is a genuine apprehension of universal and transcendent religious reality as revealed through lived experience, that is, ritual expression. symbols, songs, slogans, flags, other visceral components of an identity group's ritual celebration develop unquestioned, transcendent meaning over time, and they serve to unite an identity group and unify them together against any shared threat against their way of life. National Socialists believe Jews, Slavs, other so-called Untermensch were agents of destruction that represented the ultimate evil in the world and a threat to their so-called Aryan way of life. For adherents of Nazi doctrine, non-Aryans were determined to challenge and undermine the purity of the bulk. For Nazis, the Enabling Act, the Nuremberg laws represented the symbolic beginning of the Aryan struggle to defend Nazi ascendancy from what they considered to be the ongoing encroachment, both visible and invisible, of an inherently evil and corrupt social, cultural, and political value system that was championed first and foremost by Jews. According to Durkheim, individual members of the civil religious group, they ritually gather together at intervals to reaffirm their common identity, their shared value systems, which were all, this is very important, which were often defined against a rival value orientation. In the case of Nazism, Nazi civil religion, adherents were defined as much by who they were as they were by who they were not. Repetitious and ritualistic community gatherings serve to sustain and strengthen the continuity of a civil religious group and results in the creation of an enemy other that is vilified to the point where they become an enemy of the civil religious community that ultimately must be eliminated. Nazi nationalist civil religious ideology was primarily based on racial and ethnic criteria. It was specifically inspired by the racist pseudoscience that championed social Darwinism. Racist social Darwinist ideas played a major role in defining Nazi civil religion, specifically one of the core tenets of the civil religion, which positioned ethnic Germans, so-called Aryans, as the Herrenvolk, the master race. Houston Stewart Chamberlain, the son-in-law of the German composer Richard Wagner, was very influential in fusing social Darwinian ideas with anti-Semitism. In his second volume of his book called The Foundations of the 19th Century, which was published in 1899, he argued that Germans were superior to other races, and this superiority was threatened by the Jews. In Mein Kampf, Hitler proposed that Germanic peoples were the purest of the Aryan race and were therefore the master race. Others, people like Africans, Slavs, non-Aryans, were mostly categorized as inferior. In their book, The Racial State, Michael Burley and Wolfgang Wipperman argue that Jewish people were seen as the embodiment of evil by the Nazis. Thus, according to Hitler, the Aryan race had to be maintained, it had to be improved, it had to be, interbreeding with less valuable races, as Hitler suggested, it would inevitably lead to an extinction of the Aryan race. For Nazis, the Aryan race represented the core strength of the nation. Thus, the nation was defined by anti-Semitism. Jews were evil. Jews were hell-bent on destroying the Herrenvolk. Ultimately, it was this nationalist-inspired anti-Semitism that eventually culminated in the Holocaust. Group X is inherently evil. dangerous to the sacred cause, as Michael Burley said. They are inherently dangerous to the chosen people, the superior people. Thus, Group X must be exterminated or removed. The term Lebensraum, living space, first used by the Leipzig University geographer Friedrich Ratzel. In his work titled Political Geography, published in 1897, Ratzel likened the state to an organism which needed further space, Lebensraum, to expand. This organic theory of the state could be said to reflect the characteristics of much late 19th, early 20th century political geography, as employed ideas derived from biology and other physical science and applied to politics and society. And two elements of this organic state theory concept were crucial. And first and foremost, Ratzel's emphasis on migration and colonization, occupying new space by certain species. Second, the notion that human culture depends directly on land and methods of agriculture. The idea of Lebensraum becomes a major part of Nazism, referring to Germany's expansion into territories in the East, usually held by the Soviet Union, justified the need for agricultural land in order to maintain the German nation. In Mein Kampf, Hitler, no doubt inspired by the ideas of Ratzel, articulated Lebensraum as a kind of natural law through which the superior Aryan race has the right to displace inferior races in order to achieve new Lebensraum. The politics of Lebensraum, of living space, an early tenet of Nazi ideology, explicitly assumed the racial superiority of Germans as the master race, that by virtue of their superiority had the right to displace any other people deemed inferior. Another element of Nazi nationalist civil religion was the idealization, romanticization of the past, tradition, folklore. The Nazis' interest in folklore is addressed in a number of scholarly publications, specifically Albert Rosenberg's Kulturgemeinde, issued a flood of literature on Nordic Germanic literature. Its two major journals were primarily dedicated to Nordic Germanic symbols, traditional folklore derived from peasant ancestors. First and foremost, this folklore was a quest for cultural unity of the Volk. Attention was drawn on alien elements of German culture and foreign influence, even humanism, which led to a distinction between an academic upper class who could speak Latin, Italian, or French, and the common folk. Nordic Germanic culture was praised as native culture. It soon became the basis of German self-identification. It was claimed that the social and religious order of the Nordic Germanic tribes was the order of the future, and that the Roman civilization of the past had seriously weakened German folk culture. Nazis contrasted healthy peasant culture and degenerate city culture by stressing the significance of family bonds and village customs and traditional festivals, folk music, folk dances, wearing lederhosen. According to the Third Reich's Blood and Soil program, the peasantry was seen as the Nordic race's life source, even though peasants' contribution to the Reich was insignificant. However, it remains questionable whether Hitler believed in the folklore policies, since he greatly admired bombastic, monumental building, as seen in his plans to make Germany's capital Berlin, the world capital, Germania. Initially, Hitler and the Nazis wanted to transform the subjective consciousness of the German people into a single-minded, obedient national community. Thus, they wanted to replace class, regional, and specifically religious allegiances. even though there was some diversity in views amongst Nazi leaders as to the future of supernatural religion in Germany, Hitler favored the Protestant religion under the Gleichschaltung process. He sought to create a unified Protestant Reichschurch. The goal of this church would be to eradicate the Protestant church's influence in the state and in the civil religion. In Nazi civil religion, the state and the messianic figure of Hitler must remain the primary object of veneration. Once again, according to William Shirer, this new idea of the German Protestant church, a Reichschurch, it would not have any priests. You would have instead Reichs orators that would address the congregation. All crucifixes, all traditional religious symbolism that refer to Christianity would be removed. Pictures of saints, the Bible would be banned. Instead, Mein Kampf would replace the Bible as the most sacred book. However, owing to strong resistance by the churches, this plan to implement a Protestant Reichschurch actually failed. But Stanley Payne argued in his book, The History of Fascism, that fascism basically presupposed a post-Christian, post-religious, and secular, that is, civil religious frame of reference. Thus, it was fundamental to fascism to create a civil religion that would bind the nation together in a new common faith and loyalty. For members of the cult of Nazism, Hitler was the messianic figure sent to establish and lead this new common faith. In the civil religion of Nazism, Hitler was the embodiment of the German nation. He became the object of veneration. His ideas became gospel. Although it failed to use the Protestant church as a hub to create a new civil religion, maybe a more uncivil religion, if you will, Mein Kampf inevitably became the holy book in this civil religion of Nazism. Hitler himself was the highest sacred authority. In the words of Carl Schmitt in 1934, this provided Hitler with the authority to serve the highest form of administrative justice. So the question, I guess, now is, how do we get from a state with a civil religion centered around race-based militant nationalism to mass slaughter and genocide of particular groups of people? According to Daniel Goldhagen, it's really easy. It's really a simple answer to the question. It's politics. He states that, quote, the history of our time suggests that eliminationism, mass slaughter, genocide is actually integral to politics, end quote. Goldhagen argues that mass murder is a political act. Politicians create the conditions for mass slaughter over time, as Hitler did by creating a Nazi civil religion through the 1920s and 30s. Additionally, Goldhagen asserts that mass elimination is always preventable and always results from conscious political choices. Many Germans, too many Germans, made a conscious personal and political choice to follow the ideology of a sociopathic, racist bigot and career liar who told them over and over that Germany's misfortunes in the early 20th century were caused by particular groups of non-Germans who ultimately had to be held accountable for their crimes against the Aryan Volk. Far from occurring in a frenzy of bloodlust, atrocities like the Holocaust are usually the result of orders and meetings, decisions of a handful of powerful people. The practitioners of a given civil religion can be convinced over time that the only way forward is to eliminate the enemies they have heard so much about for so long. The final solution to the Jewish question evolved during the first 2 years of World War II, leading to the Holocaust, where the aim was to murder every last Jew in the German grasp. The final solution was a policy of the Nazi Party, a policy of deliberate systematic genocide that was formulated by the Nazi leadership in January of 1942 at the Wannsee Conference, which was held near Berlin. And following this, the Holocaust, as we know, took the lives of more than 6 million Jews, as 400,000 in the camps, 200,000 at the hands of the Einsatzgruppen killing squads, 250,000 Sinti and Roma individuals, 3,000 homosexuals, 1,900 Jehovah's Witnesses, and many others. It was the conscious cultivation of civil religion of Nazism that made the killing possible. The idea that the German way of life was doomed if the evil scourge of certain groups of people was not eradicated was encouraged for at least 2 decades prior to the Holocaust by Nazi civil religious dogma. Historian Raoul Hilberg, in his work, The Destruction of European Jews, explained the steps which he believed led to the Holocaust. He argued that it was an administrative process carried out by bureaucrats in a network of offices that spanned the continent. The willing executioners were adherents of the Nazi civil religion that focused on the restoration of German greatness at the expense of those deemed the enemy of the nation by the National Socialist leadership. For Hilberg identified 4 key stages in the Holocaust. The first stage was the definition and registration of Jews. Who was a Jew? And then registering Jews. The second step was the expropriation of Jewish property. The third step, concentration into ghettos and then camps. And fourth, annihilation. Now, I would argue for the inclusion of an additional stage. I think Hilberg has definitely hit the nail on the head, but it seems that there was a preparatory stage, somewhere between the definition and registration of Jews and the expropriation of Jewish property. It seems that there was a preparatory stage where the foundations of hate were laid through the conscious construction of a civil religious-based community of believers who were ultimately willing to participate in the expropriation of Jewish property, the concentration of Jews into ghettos and camps, and ultimately the annihilation. The violence associated with the Holocaust was prepared obviously well in advance of 1942 and the official enactment of the policy of the final solution. In the case of Germany, the civil religion of Nazism, crafted by Hitler and his racist anti-Semitic minions, consciously mobilized Nazi devotees and other Germans into killing by tapping into latent prejudices, simmering hatred, to create what Goldhagen called supportive eliminationist milieus. In a civil religious centered state, violence and killing become a righteous and holy duty. The threat to the people must be eliminated at all costs. Hence, the almost mocking joyfulness we see behind much mass murder and genocide inspired by civil religions in the 20th century. Thank you very much. Any questions about anything?
Do you want them on chat? Or
I can take them verbally and I can do my best to answer them verbally, or I'll take
Okay.
them on chat.
My question was, you referred to Goldhagen, and I'm assuming the book that you are referring to most is Hitler's Willing Executioners?
No, ma'am. The book that I'm referring to most is Worse Than War. That's
Okay.
hence the reason I've kept using the term eliminationism. which he introduces in that work as a more encompassing idea behind mass slaughter and Holocaust, mass slaughter and genocide. He believes that there needs to be a distinction or between the two because they're not the same, but usually they are lumped into the same definition.
Okay, I had read
would
the
argue
first.
that, excuse me, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, I had read the first, but not the one you mentioned.
Check out Worse
Okay.
Than War. He's got a book, and public television also did a series with him, a video series on Worse Than War, which is quite moving. And I'm a big fan of Goldhagen. I know he's sometimes somewhat controversial.
Yeah, the reason I'm laughing is that I saw Raoul Hilberg at a public speech right after Goldhagen's Willing Executioners came out, and I was sort of shocked by the fact that Hilberg hated it and felt it should never have been published, which I read it and I didn't actually agree with him that it shouldn't be published, but of course I'm not a historian, and Hilberg was just incensed by that book. So whatever. I don't think he's, I don't know that he could add to that commentary because it seems to me that he died not long after that, but I'm not sure of that.
That I'm not sure of either. All right, I got a question from one of our instructors, our history instructors at AIM, Steve Steger. Do you see a parallel between the sacred treatment of the flag, i.e. the treatment of, I don't know if that says Kavanaugh, but I think that's supposed to be somebody else, following him kneeling during the Nationalist. You know, Steve, that's a tough question. It's a loaded question. That's a question that applies to the United States and at a very tumultuous time. I'm not really sure. Oh, that's a student question. Thank you very much, Steve. I think to some people in the United States, especially people that have served in combat overseas, I think that there is a sacredness, a sacred quality to the United States flag. And when Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem, that is probably why some people in society got upset, is because they, as I teach in my classes, the flag is merely a symbol of the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States is really the one aspect of United States civil religion that actually binds the entirety of the citizenry together here in the United States. We don't really have a folk culture or anything like that. We have this agreed upon contract, this agreed upon constitution, which is represented by the flag. And I think that's why people got bent out of shape by it. Although on a personal level, Colin Kaepernick was right. I mean, here we are. Alicia, to what extent, how are you doing, Alicia? To what extent were average German citizens aware of mass genocide occurring in camps and elsewhere? How specifically was civil religion enough to erode their basic humanity? That's a really good question. First of all, Alicia, let me qualify that I am not an expert on Nazi Germany. My PhD, I'm an expert on Northern Ireland and civil conflict between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland and the southwestern lowlands of Scotland. However, I've taught about Nazi Germany for a long time, taken a lot of classes, and from my understanding, most Germans understood what was going on. It seems like the camps were constructed very close to various communities. When you have large sprawling camps, you have to service camps. You have to have the German version of Cisco to come in and feed bring food in. You have to have plumbers, come in. You have to have, plumbers to come in and I guess arrange or construct very squirrely apparatuses for the mass killing apparatus. You have to have janitors. You have to have a service industry that supports, I would assume, the camp. Thus, railroad conductors, those types of people. My assumption is that most Germans understood what was going on when, the deli down the block or the synagogue closed up and, their Jewish neighbors all of a sudden disappeared. And especially compound that with the rhetoric, the civil religious rhetoric and ritual gatherings that were being held in their midst regularly. How was civil religion enough to erode their basic humanity? When you are fed over time a steady diet of hate, a steady diet of messianic visions that is pointing to your ultimate destruction if you don't do something about the enemy in your midst, then over time, I think you begin to fall for that line of reasoning, that what dare I say, that reality. It's like religion. I mean, we call it a civil religion because it's a secularized version of religion. One of my big fears of somebody who studies this phenomena is that a more militant, more nationalistic civil religion is beginning to take root in the United States. How would you personally characterize aspects of current civil religion in the United States? Mr. Goetz, I'm personally terrified of it right now. What I saw on January 6th is the ultimate what we saw on January 6th is essentially a version of 1923. The designs were the same to interfere with the Republican process. So there is a militant nationalist civil religion that is right now composed of many disparate groups that is beginning to take shape in the United States. And it should be chilling to many people, especially older people, especially Europeans that have a recollection of the 1930s and 40s. Who's the boogeyman now? Who's the enemy of the people? The so-called enemy of the people? How do we refer to people who have ideas that are different than ours? The tenor of political discussion right now is dangerous. Do you think, this is Jeremy Rotini. Hi, Dr. Rotini, how are you doing? Do you think Hitler intentionally and consciously used aspects of civil religion? Was it an intentional manipulation of civil religion or a product of civil religion already in place? That's a good question. I honestly think Hitler intentionally and consciously developed a style of civil religion that he grew up witnessing working in supernatural religions. And so I think that he wanted to frame his state, his version of fascism, like the Catholic Church had done, like the Protestant Church has done, through constant ritual and established dogma and symbols. He understood that he could bring people together in some kind of common bond. Obviously, he's also playing on the disenchantment of German people after World War I, especially veterans and others. So I actually think it was intentional. I'm not sure if he's playing on an already existing civil religion, maybe to the point where, he is harvesting some of those symbols from the past. He's hearkening back to some kind of Germany that was once great that needs to be lifted up again. I hope that's answering your question.
Yeah, it does. It just, honestly, if
This is the hard thing in this kind of format, isn't it?
Yeah. But no, if it was intentional, to me, that just makes it even that much more terrifying.
Much more sinister. And
Yeah.
see, Jeremy, this is what I'm seeing in America today. There is a militant, not a patriotism, okay, a much more militant nationalism being intentionally cultivated by a handful of movers and shakers. Okay, let's see. On an avid sportsman's, yes, flags, heroes. Fortunately, we don't see these fanatics as a danger. Now, Sarah, so Sarah is, when they were reading off about my dissertation and my work, my research, one of the things that I study and I am a fan of is I'm a big fan of Rangers Football Club. And in my work, football, whether it be Rangers Football Club, Celtic Football Club, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Chelsea, a lot of these football clubs have cultural components and may be linked to a wider civil religion. So, for instance, Celtic Football Club, a club that is associated with Irish republicanism, a club that is classically associated with the Roman Catholic Church, a club that is synonymous with famine refugees in Scotland, a club with intimate ties to the Irish Republican Army and the other offshoots thereof in the 20th century. Celtic Football Club is part of a wider civil religion of Irish Roman Catholicism and nationalism. It is a bulwark, I would say, of Irish nationalist civil religion. So for me, certain clubs, not so much here in the United States so far, but definitely in Europe, in Northern Africa, in the Middle East, we have clubs that are associated with certain ideological points of view. Now, Barcelona is associated with the left. Barcelona is associated with progressive ideas. Barcelona is associated with Basque separatism oftentimes. So their sport is definitely, Sarah, worth bringing up. It can be a primary component of civil religion. Perhaps we could see hosting the Olympics in the 1936 in Germany could be part of this Hitlerian vision of civil religion. An opportunity to display the physical prowess, physical superiority of the Aryan race, in a ritualistic type of setting with all of the flags and the symbol and the uniforms that we've seen in that footage of the Nazi Olympics. Let's see. My great-grandmother was a Jewish woman who married a German baron's son and was banished with her husband in the 19th century. Definitely. So anti-Semitism was something that Adolf Hitler tapped into. Adolf Hitler, I think that most people understand that it is something that, not just in Germany, but in Europe, dates back at least to the medieval period, at least to the Black Plague period, if not before. There's a long history of scapegoating Jews for many different things, many very bizarre things like poisoning water during the plague and all kinds of unusual things. So Adolf Hitler and his followers were simply seizing on an anti-Semitic sentiment that was interwoven into Western European, dare I just say European society. In what ways, Alicia, this is a good question as well. She's one of my star students, by the way. Alicia, what ways can the average citizen combat waves of aggressive nationalism? You've got to show up and protest and be willing to sacrifice maybe your freedom of your life when these types of movements start to become aggressive and take power. You have to stand up to them. For me, you can't just peacefully stand up to them. You have to stand up to them by force. Fascists only understand force. Fascists can't be compromised with. Militant nationalists can't be reasoned with. What would have been the options for Germans in Nazi Germany who did not wish to take part in the civil religion? Specifically poor people. Was leaving the country feasible? Not, Alicia, this is a great question as well. Not everybody was a member of the Nazi Party. Not everybody was a pin-wearing, card-carrying member of the Nazi Party. So you could ignore it. If you were male, it was hard because you would be swept up in the armed forces. I guess if you were a female, you could be drafted into one of the various Nazi auxiliaries. As a female, you would be pressured to have as many Aryan children as possible. It would be hard. But at the ground level, at the very beginning, Alicia, if more people had stood up to this at the very beginning in the 1920s, it's hard to say that it may not have happened, but at least you could have pushed back a little bit. I think that what we have to do with the Nazi period is we take it as a kind of a blueprint of how we need to act if these types of forces try to inaugurate a resurgence in our own nations. You protest against them, you hit back against them, you vote against them. We have nationalists that are sitting in Congress right now, in the Washington, D.C., in the hallowed halls of the Capitol. We have one fascist nationalist that is representing Colorado in the Capitol. She is a militant nationalist. We got to vote her out. This isn't supposed to be political or anything like that. These are just the facts. We now have a resurgence of this strain of ideology, this kind of, you can hear from my accent, I'm originally from Alabama, this George Wallace type of fascism that has really exploded in the United States. If you're ever wondering what it would look like if George Wallace ever won the presidency, well, you've had a good look at what that would have looked like. Remember, during my talk, I mentioned that it's politicians that over time cultivate these ideas. They establish boogeymen within our midst, enemies that we're supposed to rally around, that we're supposed to build walls against. And so we must be vocal against it. We can't be weak in the face of nationalism. And, you can't be weak on the people, the ultra nationalists, the insurrectionist terrorists that stormed the Capitol on January 6th. What the Republic can do now is make an example of these people by throwing them in jail for a long time. The people of the United States have to understand there are consequences for this type of activity. One of the reasons I wanted to give this, let's see here, we had the social media exclude. Yeah, that's the thing, Hitler was a liar. When we allow our politicians just to blindly lie in front of our face over and over and over and over and over again, the less intellectual amongst us start to take that as gospel. And that's what happens, I would say, in Germany, even amongst an educated population. Like with the QAnon stuff. The QAnon stuff is amazingly bizarre, but it's just as bizarre as Hitler thinking that, you know, Jews were involved in some kind of international conspiracy that controlled everything from banking to baseball. You know, people like Hitler, people like the nationalist politicians in the United States today, they just say stuff without any evidence. And what we have to do, Alicia, is hit back at that nonsense and let them know that it's unacceptable. But if you let it just roll for 20, 30, 40 years, you know, that becomes, at least for some people, their reality. Vaccines are bad. You know, the emails are coming to get us and all this kind of crap. You can't let those kind of lies, that kind of misinformation fester in a modern society, especially in a society like we have today, a digitized, you know, connected society. Other questions?
Well, I can't imagine if Hitler had access to social media.
God, you know,
I can't
how
even.
dangerous would that have been? I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen how dangerous manipulating social media can be in the wrong hands in the modern era, whether it's European politicians, whether it's Asian politicians, or whether it's right here in the United States. Jeremy, let's always make it very clear. It's not just here in the United States where we have these kind of ultra nationalist type of civil religious movements. We see them in, you know, one of the great examples of an ultra nationalist civil religion cultivated over time would be North Korea, where you have all of those different kind of quasi-religious symbols related to the state, all, you know, linked all the way up to the three leaders since World War II.
Yeah,
So it's
sure.
not
Very good point.
This is not an American phenomenon. This is a worldwide phenomenon. I guess it'll be up to scholars to, you know, in the first half of the 20th century to figure out why, you know, why we kind of are reverting back to this. And like you said, Jeremy, you know, social media in the wrong hands. And I guess that's why we've seen some of these private companies crack down on, you know, what their users can put out there, is because maybe they understand where all of this can lead. It's clear. I mean, it's clear where all of this can lead. It can lead to people storming the Capitol, you know, a la the Bastille type of stuff. You know, this is stuff that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, to be honest with you. You know what I honestly thought? I honestly thought that once my parents' generation died out and my grandparents died out, that we would all live happily ever after and love each other. But that did not happen, unfortunately. That all of this kind of crooked fascism and this Jim Crow BS that I grew up in the South, you know, your leftover Jim Crow BS would just kind of fade away as we grew to know each other better, had better understandings of one another. But boy, was I ever wronged.
I have another question for you. So I've read Bella's book on civil religion.
Sweet.
But so my master's thesis for my religious degree, actually, I wrote it on civil religion, but I don't, it's been a while since I read it, but do you remember, I remember him using a lot of American symbols and a lot of talk about civil religion in this country, but does he talk about that in other countries?
He also, he doesn't. He is specifically an Americanist, and I in my work I used his framework because it could be superimposed to the Northern Irish experience. Bela, like you said, Bela mainly talks about the creation of an American civil religion during the 20th century, composed of, you know, the shared symbols and songs and founding documents and heroes and folklore and history. I don't know of him applying that to Europe. And is QAnon worldwide? I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't know. I think it's mainly us, because it's QAnon means that there's like a bunch of Democrats in Washington that are satanic, pedophile, baby eaters, or something like that. That's kind of the crux of it, from what I understand.
Don't forget about the Jewish space lasers.
And the Jewish space lasers that caused the wildfires. Poor Californians, man. The Jewish space lasers. You know, who knew, right?
You know, the one thing that I've noticed that factually they never seem to propose is, why would this be true? I mean, obviously it's not true, but what on earth would Jews gain from wildfires in California? It seems to me, on the face of it, people ought to be able to say that is not a match.
It's anti-Semitic idiocy. And we're now once again in kind of an environment where you just kind of say things and don't necessarily have to back it up, right? We got murderers and rapists and thieves coming across the southern border. Well, hell, what I see is a bunch of desperate people fleeing hurricanes and gangs. You know, it's that kind of vibe. You don't necessarily have proof of it. Just say it. And that riles people up. That's that pop, you know, all of these fascists, these civil religious conductors are populists, all of them. So they play on the emotions of their audience. Like Hitler, I always tell my students, Hitler was not a great speaker. Hitler was a redneck that said the same damn thing over and over again and rolled his eyes in the back of his head and moved his arms around and all of that crap. If you really look at his speeches, there's rarely any substance other than the Treaty of Versailles sucks and the West sucks and Jews suck and here's what we have to do to make ourselves awesome again. Over and over and over and over again. That's what populist politicians do. It's what George Wallace did.
Somebody asked why it was happening again. I would propose fear, and the fact that I think particularly white males, see that their power is shifting downward and that they're losing their majority position. I think that's going to cause a lot of, you know.
Why does Hitler happen? Why does Mussolini happen? Why does Kim Il-sung happen? Why do we have dictators that rise up? And like you said, I think it is fear. It is fear. You know, after World War I, there was fear of the unknown. You've got a bunch of veterans that are unwhole who come home. You have the Germans were never vanquished from the battlefield, so to speak. You know, Germany was never invaded by the Allies. You've got a Germany who had given so much to academia, the arts, music, and all of a sudden they were the enemy of the world. They were the dregs of the world. They were broken. They were rudderless. And I'm wondering now, Laura, if, like you said, there's a segment of our society that feels the same way, that feels that their culture is under attack, that their way of life is under attack, that the old ways, the traditions, traditional American culture is under attack. By whom, I'm not really sure. You know, in the 19th century, they said it here in Colorado, you know, down at Ludlow, they said it was under attack by, you know, people from Slavic countries like Lithuania and Latvia. The people from Greece were coming in. We've got Jews coming in from Ukraine and southern Russia that are supposedly destroying the Irish, the Poles. coming in, the Southern Italians, Lebanese, they were supposedly destroying the fabric of American life. So although we thinking people understand this not to be true, that the dynamics of community are ever changing, some people see change as they do throughout time as a threat. And if you have the right leaders to articulate their fears, they are able to mobilize the civil religious community to act. And that's what happened on January the 6th. We saw the symbols. I saw Christian symbols from the Protestant church there. I saw symbols of law enforcement there. I saw symbols of the military there. And all of those were framed by symbols of the state. I saw symbols of a certain politician everywhere there. There's a lot of research to be done, and I think that perhaps people need to start thinking of not just a civil religion in the United States, because I think Bela successfully argued for that. I think that what we're seeing here is perhaps a more militant version of the civil religion of the United States. A more militant nationalist version that's not going away. We'll see it. I mean, it's already, the seeds have now been sown. Now we got a generation or two to start voting these people out and drowning their voices out and calling them out as charlatans. What we don't want to do is call out parties, because, you know, in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, there's a really good, well-meaning, non-fascist, non-nationalist type of people. But as happened in Germany, what the Nazis did is they co-opted the voices of other well-meaning moderate, let's say center-right, and more conservative traditional groups. Other questions? I'm actually glad the conversation kind of went in this direction, because it is actually my intent. My intent was to kind of spark this idea that the sinister civil religion of Nazism, the civil religion that took root in 1920s, 30s, and early 40s Germany, is not something that is relegated to the distant past and can be replicated in modern societies, contemporary societies, I should say. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you for your question on sports, because that question on sports is so important.
Thank you. This has been a very helpful conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Mawson. I appreciate you attending. I really do.
It dovetails with what we did at the interfaith service, dealing with lies, repetition of untruth statements by people in leadership. I appreciate your comments about Hitler's repetition of those lies and how it can corrupt folks who are ordinarily really good people, and but whose reality changes in the midst of those lies. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words.
Thank you. Reverend Mawson did an excellent piece. He's written a wonderful article about the big lies.
I have a feeling that within the next couple of decades, we're going to see lots of scholarly research revolving around that kind of core theme of big lie, and not just in our time, but drawing from experience from the 20th century past. You know, we know this, right, Ms. Gilbert? We're a product of the 20th century. That's what I'm trying to impart to my students in my 20th century world class, especially at this point in the 21st century. We're the shadow of the 20th century.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, see, good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. We'll be leaving. Bye.